Hello, everyone. Thanks for listening to the Moz House podcast, where we dive into the work of current resident artists and exhibiting artists here at Moz House on the Shinnecock Indian Nation. This is Jeremy Dennis. I'm artist and photographer, lead artist of Moz House. Today, we're joined by two current resident artists and Homebody Fellows, Chisato Chisa Hughes and Chris M Yee, both June residents and artists here at Moz House. As an introduction, Chisa is a filmmaker whose work asks powerful questions about memory, belonging, and how we relate across time and place. Their debut film, Many Moons, explores the histories of Chinese expulsion in Humboldt County and the kinships formed between Chinese and native people in the aftermath. Their next project, Behind the Horizon Line, is inspired by poet Etel Adnan and reflects on borders and their lingering shadows. We're also joined today by Chris M Yee. Chris M is a multidisciplinary artist whose work beautifully deconstructs the human body, politically and historically. Their sculptural and two-dimensional works explore memory, commodification, and what it means to carry the physical and emotional residue of this world in our skin, our posture, and our presence. Both of these artists are recipients of the Homebody Fellowship, a residency opportunity for BIPOC artists based in the Bay Area, supported by the Homebody Fund and the East Bay Community Foundation. We're honored to hold space and have them here for June here at Moz House. So we can jump into our first questions. Maybe we'll start with origin stories, whichever of you want to begin. But how did you find yourself in the arts? How did you become an artist? And what was the moment that you knew this was your path?
First of all, I'm so impressed by how you synced into DJ mode. Yeah, Jeremy really does everything. And we're taking lots of pictures of you.
Nothing less for you all.
I'm just impressed. There are many hats. Do you want to start, Chris?
Origin stories. Happy Pride Month, everybody. My origin story. Cheers. My origin story. How far back did we go? What did we say?
What's your first artwork?
My first artwork? I don't know.
I'd love to see your first artwork.
I don't even know if I have that.
I think I've always been someone who liked maximizing, and film felt like a way to do many things at once, many different art forms at once. I think early on, it also was a way to get out of public speaking for me. I think I made my first documentary because I didn't want to be standing in front of a class. But yeah, I think it's something that...
My origin story. I used to make art in the basement. It was an unfinished basement full of cobwebs and very poor lighting, and there was silence there. And I would make art in a dimly lit basement, got in trouble with playing with glitter, watched candles burn because it was fun. Things like that. I think it was really grounding for me in the beginning, and
sounds
ritualistic, peaceful. It swallowed the noise of the outside and spat it into whatever my hands were touching. I went to art class, but that was very different. We just copied what was in front of us and what the teacher already made in these folders. There are like hundreds of photos you could pick from, and we just copied. That was art class for me. I think ultimately, as I started asking myself questions as to why I want to continue making art as a lifestyle and as a career, not only did it feed that same hunger of wanting to swallow that noise and push it onto sculptures and papers and make it silent in that way, silent as in metaphorically. And I also think it helped me understand where I want to be in this world and how I want to move forward. I think as I am connecting with more artists and finding myself more embedded in the network of artists, the web of artists, I find more ease in trusting what I want to make and being okay with the uncertainty of where it will take me, or yeah.
Thank you, Chris. And she's the same question to you, your origin story. How did it all get started?
I really like hearing that from you.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. I would say that I've always been attracted to storytelling, whether it was making puppets and then having performances behind the couch, or yapping about something that I'd made. I made a lot of Reading Rainbow stories when I was little, if you ever watched Reading Rainbow, that I wish still existed. And then I think as I got older and more oriented towards like political pragmatism, I think I was often thinking about what I was good at and what I cared about, and feeling that I was better at making things for the long haul and metabolizing over time than something like paralegal work, which I've tried and was like minorly successful at, but it felt like cosplay. Yeah, I think it's a way for me to maximize and do many things at once and keep engaged and invested, and at the same time metabolize the world around me, like you, Chris. I do think it's a way for me to tap into my very social self, and then in the post-production phase have so much time mulling over and massaging what I've spent my time recording, which is just a very different frequency. So when I look back at my life, it all makes sense, although it didn't make sense at the time necessarily.
Thank you both for your answers. Getting deeper into your practice as artists and the themes that are common within your work, I wonder if you could both talk a little bit about the role memory plays in your creative process. I think I also asked both of you about ghosts in relation to memory, and haunting perhaps is related to that. I wonder if, are you ever haunted by what you choose to remember or forget, and how do you prioritize that in your art?
Wow. Are you just winging it? Are you just coming up with these?
I
wrote it all
You
down.
wrote all of this, and then you casually were like, yeah, maybe we'll do it at, mate, do you want to do it? Or do you not want to? You already had it all loaded?
Yeah.
Okay.
He said, no, I'd
Since
probably
when?
cry. Are you ever haunted by what you choose to remember or what you perhaps choose to forget?
God. That's a crazy question, Jeremy.
Do you find these questions through looking at our work, or
It's a combination of looking at, like, what's the through line?
I feel like you could write a dissertation about the question you just asked. I think like this really amazing point that was made in this article that I found really influential. It's called The Glossary of Haunting. Part of the point is that people are plagued or haunted by what they choose to forget. I hope that I'm not misquoting it or misremembering or misrepresenting it, but just the point that settler colonialism is its own haunting. That's not individuated, that's just permeating, which feels like so much a part of your work, Jeremy, to me. So I guess I think what I'm interested in is not so much individuated haunting so much as like collective haunting, and what we've chosen to willfully forget collectively and are actively choosing to ignore. And yeah, the kind of things that come from that.
I think for Chris, I wanted to ask you the same thing in terms of, I think we as artists, we have so much to make art about. I think we're all making work about memory, perhaps family memory or community stories, for example. Do you have any themes within your work that you feel like you keep returning to, or maybe poking at your side that you have to approach it soon because it keeps nagging at you? Maybe an upcoming project or idea you're working on?
I was gonna answer the haunting question, actually.
Oh, please do.
I was trying to find this film that I watched a while ago. It was introduced to me by a professor. I believe it was called Operation Baby Lift. It was a documentary on this Vietnamese woman who was adopted by white folks in the United States, and she goes back to Vietnam to find out who her parents are. And I remember asking the professor a question, and this was when we were in lockdown of COVID, and I was taking this honestly pretty traumatic art history class, showing all these films about Asian American history and documentaries. I suppose as I was reading about this history, I was also living a new phase of it. I asked the professor if this woman who chose to go back and to meet her mother, for context, she was picked up by the Americans when she was a toddler, so she has a faint memory of her mom, her biological mother. And I asked the professor, did she choose this trauma? Because when she goes back to Vietnam and she's introduced to all of her extended family, she's very jaded by the culture, by not being able to speak it. And I sometimes wonder if that's a haunting of itself. When we choose to revisit certain things, are we haunted by it, or do we choose to go back and return to it? Because there's a part of us that desires it, or desires trying to hold on to something that isn't real or truth anymore.
I think about that a lot, just in terms of being Indigenous. You're often faced with questions or prejudice around why don't you do certain things still, or why don't you know certain languages. So I think the haunting's in the form of like, why don't we talk about certain things that made that the reason that it is. So I think, Chisa, you spoke a little bit about things that we don't like to talk about, but it is part of our whole, it's part of the bigger story. I wonder if you wanted to add anything, Chisa, to Chris's, or respond to Chris's answer.
Yeah, I think that there's something really powerful in interrogating the trauma wound to those who brave it. I guess my preoccupations are more about maybe collective trauma than they are about individual trauma, but I think there's something to be said for both in that drive and where it comes from. For me, the drive feels like, at its heart, like a political act, with the acknowledgement that there's so many different subjectivities involved, wrapped in a traumatic event or an ongoing one. But I don't want to use the word healing. I think, like your point, Chris, about whether it's also trauma causing, I think that's very real. And I also think that artists of color are so often asked to interrogate their trauma in perhaps tokenizing way that I feel resistant to as well. I think that's like what you're speaking to, Jeremy. So it's a tightrope walk as to like what feels personally like fulfilling and what feels important politically, and also not trying to commodify yourself.
Fine, we're getting deep into it. There was something interesting I heard recently on the Artist Talk. I really love representational work and work about identity, and I think we're all doing work in that way. I think Ma's House supports that type of work. But what I heard in that talk that never dawned on me was that they described it, a practitioner of that work, kind of a depressing subject matter. It's like talking about trauma, it's talking about things that we need to heal from. But in both of your introduction, how you self-describe, you spoke about art, and the art that you do is fulfilling a role, gives you purpose, it tells stories in order to heal. So I wonder where you sit between, is it sitting in trauma, or is it perhaps creating a better future? And I'm going to compound that difficult question with one other. How do you see art as being this essential thing that you're working toward instead of something that's peripheral or a luxury?
I hope neither, maybe for my stuff. I think I don't want to dictate for people what a better future is, but I also think I want people to be interrogating things with care. Can I also say the name of this article with the authors? A Glossary of Haunting by Eve Tuck and C. Ree.
Nice, that name.
Also not responding to my emails, but
okay. Gotta go to NYU.
Not to put her on blast.
So as artists, I'm curious, how do you approach art? How do you present your art in a way that makes it in the forefront of purpose? So it's not some luxury, it's not something that if every other demand is met, then maybe we can spend money on art. Like, how do you think about art in such an essential way? How do you platform it?
I can answer that question. I think I chose film because I wanted it to be very accessible and wanted anyone to see it who has a link ultimately. And that was really important to me, having worked in an art institution and having seen the people who generally came, even though it was a free museum. I think there's a way that film feels really mobile and accessible. I think I also chose documentary because it was really relational, and that also felt important to me, the ways that it can feel co-created, which I actually also feel about fiction now that I'm doing fiction. Yeah, that was important to me, that it not only be available in a gallery space or a movie theater.
Yeah. I think about where I want my art to exist as well, in varied spaces, in more accessible spaces. I know that not all the work that I create can be in every space in a way that allows it to shine its best. And I'm still working on that and seeing where, as each piece grows, seeing where it then belongs. To go back to the question you initially asked, Jeremy, is it healing or trauma reliving for my art? I like to say it's giving my body the nutrients for the scab to finally fall off. I suppose in a way it's healing if that quote-unquote wound were not to leave a scar. And I don't think all of my artwork is based off trauma as well. I don't know, digesting and recycling and spitting back onto the earth what I have been consuming.
I like that. I feel like maybe my art is about looking at the scab in a different way, in a way that makes you think differently about the scab. Yeah, I think maybe I am interested in sharing responsibility with the viewers as participants too. Just like the people who are engaging with the work, putting more of the onus on them as well, that it's like shared experience. Yeah. Moving into the future. So hopefully not re-traumatizing. Hopefully not stabbing a new scar.
No.
Thank you both for answering. I know that we didn't send the questions in advance, so jumping right in. But maybe taking a step back, I'm still talking about the umbrella themes within both of your works. I wanted to ask each of you both about your practices relating to relationships. So whether it's bodies, whether it's borders or histories, how does being here in residence at a space such as Ma's house on Shinnecock land shape or shift your approach to that type of work with relationships?
I think as ICE raids are happening and as we're bombing Tehran, even with this potential ceasefire may be happening. But I think also it feels constant thinking about relationality, both on the reservation and I think with the wider world in the Hamptons. It's really on my mind, thinking about maybe all of this land being Shinnecock.
How you work with relationships and how it relates perhaps to your time here at Ma's house.
I feel as though my time at Ma's house, I've really been immersed with its history and its people and the actions that the people at Shinnecock are currently doing to address issues, to call out folks and the community, that it's like a force field. I feel as though what has shifted in my approach to my work is the call to action. I've been exploring how I really want to express, and I feel as though what's more important is the call to action part. And I know that when I'm making work, it's a world for me, and I put it into whatever's in front of me, yet it may have a very different approach by the public or the viewer. And how, moving forward, how will I be more meticulous about crafting my relationship with the audience in the way that not only serves me, but the community as a whole.
Thanks, Chris. And thanks for letting me yap the first time, because I think I needed to say things out loud, and now I know what I'm going to say. Just that borders and relationships have been on my mind this whole time. I think with everything happening across the nation with ICE raids, I think being on this reservation and in community in contrast with sort of the wider Hamptons area has been really interesting, to say the least. But I think it's been really incredible to be here in a place where community is so intentional, and to feel safe here, and to also feel like I'm starting to recognize everyone around, and that people are looking out for each other very clearly, and to simultaneously be seeing that in the news as people are making their communities safer by doing their own work to have each other's back. I think that Ma's house feels like a reminder about how we make our own culture through relationships, and it feels like an exception, and I hope it becomes infectious here.
I think Ma's house really emulates people first and then the art. I heard you mention that phrase earlier today, Chisa, and I feel like the art is more powerful because of the people behind it and the community behind it.
Yeah, I hope that we start making art differently now. I think the ways that it permeates should be different. And yeah, I think now is that time. It always was that time, but I feel that more than ever.
I thank you both. Just putting the people first, and then the art comes after that. With that in mind, I wonder if you could both talk a little bit about how you as individuals who are such hardworking artists, thinking locally where you are about Shinnecock, and then you're thinking about the Hamptons, the larger nation, global conflicts at the same time. How do you find rest so that you can keep doing the work that you're doing?
I think rest exists in many ways in order for us to stay resilient and persevering. It looks and feels like singing karaoke with your friends, with people you trust and people you have aligned goals for, and people you feel safe around. You may not know everything about every person, and there are millions of conversations to be made and questions to be answered, and yet we're able to come together and be vulnerable in ways that are silly and confident it's building, and that can exist everywhere, anywhere. I feel like it really comes down to having a space in which we're able to easily access and return to, and having new faces come into the space as well that you aren't familiar with, but someone else in this group might be, this way of community. It's intergenerational, and it's always has room for more.
Yeah, I love what you said about rest being dependent on a place that you can access and return to. That makes me think about why land is so important to people who grew up on that land.
No, that's a good point.
And Shinnecock land. Because, yeah, I think rest exists for me through friendship that creates a space for me for rest. Maybe when I'm like remiss to rest on my own. Just reminders of self and people mirroring back for you what you need is always helpful, and I think what keeps us all self-regulating.
Right. We're definitely talking beyond our basic needs. I think there's something more subtle and nuanced that under capitalism, this individuality that we've created really takes us away from this type of rest that requires land and community. I think about when I think about my grandparents visiting their homeland or ancestral land back in China, how they know everybody, they have so many cousins, and I felt remembered of that as I was living here and experiencing all these events. Everybody was your cousin Jeremy or a cousin of a cousin, and it's a unexplainable feeling to know that you're cared for and you're seen as a cousin of a cousin, and you're like, oh, I wonder if I know them. Probably.
No, definitely. Yeah, so many great memories. Yeah, we did all the karaoke, went to so many events, galas. Yeah, so much we could talk about just from those memories. But the next question I wanted to ask was also unique to both of your experience. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about being both a Moz House resident and also a Homebody Fellow. For those who didn't maybe read about your bios on our website, this is the first ever artist residency for both of you. So I wonder if you could say, especially with that fresh experience, what kind of support and recognition, what has that meant to you as a queer and BIPOC artists who have also experienced other institutions and art spaces?
I think as somebody who's experienced other art spaces from being of the institution, I think this place feels remarkable and extremely personal and attentive in a way that has felt like a privilege. So I'm really grateful for that, and also grateful for the experience, like being a guest on this reservation and to get to meet folks in the tribe and to experience things by doing them here. It feels like a privilege, and I'm really grateful for it. Interesting to contrast my experience of the West Coast, later contact, even though up and down the state there are missions. There's the whole history of the missions in California. Humboldt was one of the last places to be settled in the continental U.S., and so I think I was also interested to see what it felt like here versus there. I just feel pretty unfamiliar with the East Coast and felt like I needed to come in person to understand it. So I'm also grateful for that.
For me, I think it's been a real pleasure and privilege to allow my guard to be down as a queer person and an artist, because there's vulnerability in identifying as either one of those things from the spaces that I've been in. And I think the mindset that was instilled in me as I grew up with immigrant parents, coming from a rural village to be in San Francisco, which I know is a very queer accepting space, and yet I had to really internally work through that. So I think the support and recognition that Ma's House has provided me with the Homebody Fellowship is a push to move forward and to keep moving on, and knowing that places like this exist makes me know that there are other spaces that definitely do exist like this, and that even we, Chisa and I, have the power to make spaces like this exist. And I hope that everybody is able to find places like these or create them yourselves.
Yeah, I was going to say that it feels like this is a vindication of what we're doing, which is really, it's nice to have a vote of confidence. And also I think I'm constantly thinking about building our own back where we live.
Yeah.
And feeling inspired about that.
Oh, definitely. And so grateful that you're here. And speaking of finding places like this, I definitely have to shout out Fadil Fakari, who was the Ma's House resident back in November 2024, also a Homebody Fellow, and also recommended both of you to apply. So there's already a network out there that exists, and little word of mouth magic. So that's so amazing. I do want to perhaps ask a winding down question, which is looking ahead, what's next for each of you, and how can listeners follow and support or stay connected with you and your work?
I am working on a film called Behind the Horizon Line with a collective of friends who I love very dearly. We will be shooting the short film in September. I'm finishing up screenplay adjustments as I'm here. You can learn more on my website, which is chisatohughes.com. There's a documentary component that I will also be putting more information about online that is also inspired by it. I can talk about the fiction film, which is a short and is basically sort of magical realism film about a Lebanese exploratory geologist who comes to the States to find valuable extractive material within Mount Tamalpais, which is in the Bay Area where I live. In the process, her citizenship starts to unravel and falls in love with the mountain, which is a portal to other places. It's a borderless place and is sending messages to her through objects that are appearing on the mountain. The film was inspired by the writing of Adnan, who was a Lebanese lesbian poet based in the Bay Area in exile, who wrote a lot about borders, exile, war, bearing witness, wrestling with complicity, amongst many other things. Amongst the cosmos, I am also currently working on a collection of interviews that I've accumulated over the past 2 years, where I've been interviewing friends, the same series of questions having to do with borders and how we think about the future and think about our own role in world building. So that's what I'm working on right now and what I'm working on here.
Do you feel as though they ever bleed into each other? How do you compartmentalize?
Oh, they bleed into each other. And they are meant to bleed into each other. So people who I'm interviewing are also playing characters in the film. Literally, they're bleeding into each other, but I also feel like they're bleeding into each other in other ways. because I'm writing the script still in some ways. Yeah. I think right now it's been really potent going through these interviews because everything is only increasingly relevant. And I'm just so grateful for my friends' words right now, which feel helpful to come back to in this moment. I was thinking about an archive for the future often when I was doing these interviews.
To me, it feels as though as you're making these different worlds, being different films, the same people are playing different faces or different minds, and their bodies are jumping into different stories and timelines. Yeah, I think I feel that way about the materiality of my work, jumping from the past to the present and the future, the layers that they are a part of, and how the layers are exposed to this world that we live in, and how they are bleeding into each other, and what we as artists can do to manage all of that, to wrangle that in our minds, to cope with what we are experiencing. And I think looking ahead for projects that I am taking on, I've been invested in photographs and transferring photographs onto surfaces and exteriors as a way of layering. Thinking about what it means to perform and be perceived as a woman in this world, the layers of past lived in different continents to where I am now, and that transference between generations.
Thank you, Chris and Chisa, for your answers.
Listeners, you can all follow and support me through my website. It's at chrismyee.com with a CH. I'm also on Instagram at cmy.ar7. Yeah.
Thank you. Any last minute additions or things you collectively wanted to add or forgot to mention? Or
I was going to say you pronounce Humboldt.
Oh, Humboldt.
Yeah. And I said the name of the article because I was or the people who wrote.
The glossary?
Yeah. Sorry, there's so much to wade through with our interview.
I really enjoyed this deep dive. I wished it could have occurred outside of the podcast spaces. And at the same time, I feel as though the podcast space really frames what our discussion is digging into. Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, I appreciate your articulation of our work. It's interesting.
Next time you have a show, next time you have a new major work completed, definitely invite you back on to give us some updates and do a deeper dive again if it wasn't too particular. But just want to thank you, Chisa. Thank you, Chris, for being here at Ma's house. Congratulations on your first ever residency again, and hope to have you featured on the podcast in the future.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jeremy.